Open your Bibles tonight in our class, Genesis chapter 1. We're going to go all the way through the Old Testament tonight. We'll finish in Malachi. No, we're not going to do that. Genesis chapter 1 and verse 1. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Hebrews is going to tell us that God made everything out of nothing. Tonight we're talking about money. That may be why there's not as many that stayed in here. We're going to be talking about money. And I'm not afraid to talk about money. In fact, there's times whenever I just want to yell real loud, okay, today we're talking about money. So lock the doors, bolt the auditorium, put chairs in the way. Everybody stay in here. We're talking about money. It's a hot topic. It's one a lot of people don't want to touch, but something that everybody has strong feelings about. Strong feelings about. A lot of our headlines today are about money. Just the end of last week and the first of this week, the world exchange. What's happening in other countries affecting what's happening here, and all the fears and all the different ideas, and you can hear as many fears and ideas as there are people that will express them, and people are concerned about their money. Is the same thing going to happen now that happened back in 2008? Is the same thing going to happen now that happened back in the late 1920s and into the early 30s? What in the world is happening? People are excited on one hand if they're buying something and financing it that interest rates are low. They're depressed on the other hand if they're trying to live off their savings and the interest rates are low. And we hear it. It's all around us. We hear people in the larger cities talking about the crime that's going on, and some excusing destruction of property and saying, well, it's just stuff. It's just property. And others who happen to own that property are saying, wait a minute. That's my entire life. I've put it all into that, and there are so many different feelings, and it doesn't take long talking about money until it's just right there out on the edge of your sleeve, because we have feelings about money, especially when we're talking about our money. The truth is, let's listen to what God says. In the beginning, the question tonight is, whose money is it? Whose money is it? Whose money is it? Right. I had a young man that was needing work. He just gotten married in Africa, and he wanted to provide a better place for his wife, and I understood that. And at the same time, he was wanting to take some specialty courses in construction and take a class in driving so he could get a job maybe as a driver. And so he came and he said, could I borrow enough money to pay for the school, for the education part? And I said, I'll be happy to. And he said, I tell you what, I will work it off. And he was a good worker. And so I had some things that I had him do. And then whenever he was through, he came back and he said, you owe me money. And I said, I thought I advanced you the money, just talking. Tell me, if, no, I did a better job because I was paying you back than I would have done if I'd just been working for your money. And I said, well, you were working for my money. I gave it to you up front. And he was just insistent upon the fact that, that I owed him more money. And I thought that we had talked through it very well. Whose money is it? In the beginning, God created. There's not a thing in the world that we will ever create from nothing. Now, we may make things, we may alter the essence of something. We may come up with ideas that are far more reaching than the ideas of the internet. We may be able to turn around and do something that will alter literally the history of the world. But from nothing? Who owns it all? Let's listen to what God says in James chapter 1. Let's go over to James chapter 1. If you have the sheet, you can just follow right along. You'll be right there with me. You'll be looking at the same thing I'm looking at. James chapter 1 and verse 17. Every good thing given and every perfect gift is from above. All the good things come from God. All the good things come from God. Coming down from the Father of lights, with whom there is no variation or shifting shadow. God consistently is good, consistently does good things. Deuteronomy. I like Deuteronomy. Listen to what is being said here. Beginning in verse 11. Deuteronomy chapter 8 and verse 11. Listen to what God says. He says, beware that you do not forget the Lord. Beware that you do not forget the Lord your God by not keeping His commandments and His ordinances and His statutes, which I am commanding you this day. Otherwise, when you have eaten and are satisfied and have built good houses and lived in them, and when your herds and your flocks multiply, and your silver and your gold multiply, and all that you have multiplies, then your heart will become proud, and you will forget the Lord your God, who brought you out from the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. That's happened in America. That's happened in America. We don't remember the hardship of our grandparents. We don't remember, but maybe because we never knew them. We don't remember the hardship and yet at the same time the joy that our great grandparents had. I mean, they had plenty, but they lived a very simple life. Maybe they were property rich and money poor, coming out of the Depression. I remember when Judy and I first got married, I was preaching in a little community called Desdemona. It was not a disease; it's actually a town, and the Indians called it the Buffalo Waller. There was a little creek that went down through there, and they said that the buffalo used to stop there and drink, and then they would just waller in it, and they would make it into a place that resembled, and because of that it had another name, the creek didn't look like a pretty little flowing creek after the buffalo got through it. It looked like a hog waller, and so they called it Hog Town, even though there weren't any pigs there. They called it Hog Town because people would look at that, and it's right there by the bridge where you'd cross into town, and they'd say, what, is this a hog waller or something? And when we moved there, the farmers, some of them had several thousand acres of farmland, but they were all going broke. They farmed peanuts. Judy and I were 22 years old, and I just learned then that peanuts grew in the ground. And that's why they call them ground nuts. And they had 2 bad years. One year they didn't get enough rain, and the next year they got too much. And the peanuts did real well in the year that they got plenty of rain, but the ground was so wet they couldn't get in there to dig the peanuts with their equipment. They would try, and it got to the point where when they could finally get in there, that the peanuts had just rotted and come off the vines. And so it was the 3rd year in a row, and everyone was real antsy. Because, I mean, if they went down that year, then some of them were going to lose their farm. Some of them were going to lose their livelihood. And so they're begging for help. And I said, I'll do what I can. I'll do what I can. You know, you point me and tell me, and I'll be there to help you. And that year I helped farm peanuts. I drove a tractor. I did it all, and drove trucks to market with the 2 bushel bags of peanuts on the back. And I learned how to test and see if the peanuts had dried enough for us to take them to market by cutting a little hole in the side of the feed sack and digging down in there and getting some of the peanuts out of the middle, and you break them open. I got to where I loved raw peanuts. In fact, I actually preferred the raw peanuts, dried, not fresh green, but I love the raw peanuts more than I did the roasted ones. And we took peanuts to the market in any kind of vehicle that would move. And I remember one Sunday night after church that Judy goes out with me because a man, they were so desperate, a man said, I'll give you, well, it wasn't a whole lot of a gift, but he said, I'll give you this flatbed truck if you will help haul my peanuts. He was that desperate. Well, he didn't tell me when he described the truck to me that it didn't have doors on the side and that it didn't have a windshield. Well, I traded and got one that did after the fact. But anyway, Judy and I go out, and Judy's driving my old 54 Chevy pickup so that I'll have lights so I can load this flatbed truck because it looked like it was going to rain. And you could not buy a tarp. You could not buy a plastic in any place where you could park something underneath it. There was already something parked underneath it because it looked like rain. And I'm feeling for this man because he's sick. He's physically sick, and if he's got to make it. I tell you what, it wasn't a question of whether he was working hard or not, because he worked as hard as anyone else. And so Judy drives behind while I'm out there in the field, and I'm loading this truck, and I was so excited when I got it all loaded and tied down, except I hadn't tied it down enough. It wasn't tied enough. I thought it was. I hadn't learned the tricks yet. And so I go to pull out on the little highway so I can drive it to the town where they would be sold the next morning. And Judy's right there, and so I start up on, and here comes a car, and so I have to stop, and the truck rolls back, and when I put on the brakes, I unloaded the peanuts into the ditch. And so I had to take all of them off then and redo it. But they had a good year. They ended up having a good year. Everybody came together, and they had a good year. And they were thankful for each other, and they were thankful to God. Now God says, be careful when things are going really well that you do not forget me and start thinking, look what I've done. Look what I've done. Look what I've got. Look what I've accomplished. And I don't care how tough it is in America. We have it better than 85% of the rest of the world. There are a few other places that have it almost as good as we do. But even when things are bad, we still have it better than most other people in the world could ever imagine. And listen, as God continues in verse 17 of Deuteronomy chapter 8, He said, otherwise you may say in your heart when you begin to forget about God, and things are going really well, otherwise you may say in your heart, my power and the strength of my hand made me this wealth. You shall remember the Lord your God. It is He who is giving you power to make wealth. Today in America, it's so easy to hear people talk about that. Look what we've done. And a lot of it is amazing. A lot of it is very impressive. But we have an entitlement attitude. This is mine, so I'm going to go. Let's go to Psalm chapter 50 before I get off too far into that. Psalm chapter 50. Listen to what God says in verse 10. For every beast of the forest is mine, the cattle on 1,000 hills. I know every bird of the mountains, and everything that moves in the field is mine. Wow. Can you understand now why maybe even when we see it in a glimpse in a movie or we read about it, how that the Native Americans were always praying, not necessarily to Jehovah God that we know, but they were always praying whenever they would go hunting. And they are thanking God for letting them share in His bounty and what He has given. They were so thankful, and that became something that was the very core in their relationship. All of it belongs to God. Everything belongs to God, even us. Ezekiel chapter 18. Ezekiel chapter 18 is a good read. Now, you don't have to read it right now, but mark it down. Put the string in your Bible there and go back and read it later, because there are so many concepts here that it'd be easy for us to think that we only find them in the New Testament. But you do find them in the Old Testament. And God begins here in Ezekiel chapter 18 and verse 4. He said, "Behold, all souls are mine." He said, every one of them. All souls are mine. The soul of the Father as well as the soul of the Son is mine. Not only does everything belong to God, but God even owns our spirits, our eternal souls. They all belong to Him. And then He says, the soul that sins, it will die. He'll go on and talk about this very fundamental concept with God. The soul that sins will die. The Son will not bear the iniquity. That would be another lesson for another time. But I hope that you're intrigued enough with chapter 18 to go and read it, because he'll teach this core principle of his that you're accountable to God. And if you sin, you will, just like Larry was saying, man sin, man dies. Whoever that is. And we've all sinned, and so we have all been separated from God, and we will all face physical death. But He said the Son will not bear the iniquity or the guilt of His Father, and the Father will not bear the iniquity or the guilt of His Son. The soul that sins, it will die. Now there's a difference in bearing the iniquity or bearing the guilt of sin and suffering the consequences of sin. If I robbed a bank and was arrested and tried and convicted and sent to prison, Judy would suffer. She would suffer. My children, even though they're grown and gone, my grandchildren even grown and gone, they might be able to hide it from some of their friends because they live far away. But some of it would trickle down, and within the brotherhood, people would know, and everyone would know that their father was in prison, that their grandfather was in prison, and he was there because of what he did that was wrong. They would suffer the consequences of it. Some of them would be very real physical consequences. You know, Judy would have to stop and reorganize her life and figure out, how am I going to make it without the income that Mike brings? And so there would be some major adjustments. But they would not arrest her and put her in prison with me. They would not indict her. They would only come after the one who was guilty. And that's what God's saying here. But He begins by saying everyone is accountable to Him because He owns everything. All souls are mine. Everything belongs to God. Everything belongs to God. Number one, God created everything, and it belongs to Him by right of creation. Now we understand in the laws of our land, we have patent rights. And if you get a patent on something, no one else can infringe on that, because you have, even though you've rearranged whatever it was or come up with the idea, and so it's something that in the worldly sense, the way most people think, it's something that you made, and you did. You put your energy and your intelligence and all, and it's yours, and so you want it protected. You don't want someone else to make the very same thing and then turn around and be able to market it better than you, and you end up with nothing. At the same time, I've known some people that came up with some really great ideas, and they said, I don't care if everybody makes one of these. It'd be great. It'd be great. You know, I'm not interested in being famous or wealthy or whatever. You know, let them do it. but the patent law that protects. No one can take these things away from God. They're all His by right of creation, and number two, they're all His because, especially us, because He bought it back. He bought it back. And He bought us back with the blood of Jesus Christ. 1 Corinthians chapter 6 and verse 9. Listen to what God is saying here. And we're talking about things and stuff and objects, but we're also talking about money. Listen to what He says. 1 Corinthians chapter 6 and verse 19. He says, "Do you not know?" He said, "Surely you do. Surely you do." He said, "Do you not know that your body is a temple of the Holy Spirit who is in you, who you have from God, and that you're not your own? For you have been bought with a price, therefore glorify God in your body." Some translations, some copies of the ancient manuscripts that we have added, "and your spirit, which are God's." See, God owns you body, soul, and spirit. God owns your flesh and blood that comes from dust. He owns the life that was breathed into you, and He owns the soul that is eternal. God owns you body, soul, and spirit. He owns you by right of creation, and He owns you by right of redemption. He bought you again. He brought you, that's how much He wants you. Even though He already owned you. He gave you freedom and you gave yourself away. So He's bought you back. In fact, if you go to Colossians chapter 1, it will talk about Jesus being there before everything was made. And it says, "By Him were all things made, and for Him." For Him. And that's not the only place we'll read about that. You can go to the book of Revelation in chapter 4, in all of that doxology that's there, that praise to God, and the heavenly scene of the throne room of God. Even before we see what happens in chapter 5 of the Lamb that was slain. But in chapter 4, it's talking about holy, 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 the angels that are surrounding the throne of God, and they're saying that God is worthy, God is holy. And in the very last verse, verse 12 of Revelation chapter 4, we'll talk about the greatness and the goodness and the holiness of Jesus Christ. It says that they were, everything that was made by Him, by His power and by His authority, and it was all made, quite literally, the language will say, it was all made for His pleasure. Wow. Wow. I was a planned child. I was a planned child. My older brother doesn't. My younger brothers, they don't want me to say that. But my older brother, he says he doesn't mind because I was planned for him. I was not planned because my mom and dad said, "Oh, we want another child." My mother and dad said, "Paul needs someone to grow up with." And so I was planned for his pleasure. Now, it worked out really good because he's a fabulous older brother, and he would do anything in the world for me. He would die for me, and without even thinking about it. And maybe if he had time to think about it, he might not. But as long as we can keep him from thinking about it too long, he would. A fabulous brother. But I was planned. What God is saying in Colossians chapter 1 and Revelation chapter 4 and several other places, He was saying all of this was planned for Jesus. Isn't that amazing? It was all planned for Jesus. And you see how special Jesus is. Just in the few, no, we don't really see how special. We get a glimpse. We really don't see it like I'm sure that it really is. But because God will say, and we read about that in Scripture, "This is my beloved Son." Tells the whole world. The heavens open. And the Holy Spirit of God descends on Jesus. And the voice of God is saying, "This is my beloved Son in whom I'm well pleased." Amazing. Amazing. But again, Colossians chapter 1 and other places will tell us that Jesus is before everything. Not just that He existed before everything, but that in all things He might have preeminence. That in all things, Colossians chapter 1, that in all things he might have preeminence. And what has God done for him now in the time in which we live? God has lifted him up, not only raised him from the dead, but God lifted him up and gave him a name that what? Help me out, men. It's above all names. God is saying, let me show you my Son. Let me show you my Son. I want you to know my Son. And it's all pointed, not in our studies where we're saying, it's all pointed to Jesus. Everything God has done is pointing to the greatness of Jesus. So everything belongs to God. It all belongs to God. He created everything, and He created everything for a purpose, and the very foundation of that purpose is for the pleasure of Jesus. For the pleasure of Jesus. And then listen to what God says. Acts chapter 20, verse 28. He's talking to elders there. I love the context where we learn some of these, and it's the best word I can think of, tidbits of information, just glimpses. I'm not sure that tidbits really communicates what I'm feeling, but it's talking about the whole Word of God, and it uses an expression right before Acts 20 and 28 and verse 27. It uses an expression that really it just the expression blows my mind whenever it talks about the whole counsel of God. In verse 27, he said, "For I did not shrink from declaring to you," or in the New American Standard Version, it says, "the whole purpose of God." Wow. Just take a minute to let that soak in. He said, I did not draw back. I didn't shrink back from declaring to you the whole purpose of God. Man, there's so much there. We could spend a lifetime right there. But then listen to what he says. It's in that context, of how important everything is that Paul is talking about, that God's talking about through Paul, to these church elders from Ephesus. Then he says, "Be on guard for yourselves and for all the flock, among which the Holy Spirit has made you overseers, to shepherd the church of God, which He did" what? Purchased with His own blood. So even in man's rebellion, God still said, "They're mine. They're mine." They walked away. They took all of their proof and documents and everything and patents and titles and deeds and they walked away from me. I gave them that independence and that freedom, but they've chosen another God to follow, the God of this world, but I want them so much, I'm going to buy them back. And it was purchased with the blood of Jesus Christ. All things belong to Him. All things belong to Him. Not just some or most. All things belong to Him. Luke chapter 12. Luke chapter 12. This time in verse 16. They come to Jesus, and Jesus teaches them in parable. Luke chapter 12 and verse 16. "And He told them a parable, saying, The land of a rich man was very productive. And he began reasoning to himself, saying, What shall I do, since I have no place to store my crops?" That would not be a bad problem to have. And he's a farmer. So, and it says, he said, "This is what I will do. I will tear down my barns and build larger ones, and there I will store all my grain and my goods. And I will say to my soul, So you have many goods laid up for many years. Come and take ease, eat, drink, and be merry. But God said to him, You fool, this very night your soul is required of you. And now who will own what you have prepared? So is the man who stores up treasure for himself and is not rich toward God. Now hear what he's saying, and also hear what he's not saying. He's not saying that there's anything wrong. There's nothing sinful with having a successful business. There's nothing sinful about the peanut farmers having a bountiful year and is able to sustain them from the bad years that they've just had and prepare them and carry them over into the next years. There's not anything wrong with tearing down your barns and building bigger barns. It's what's going on in your heart. It's what's going on in your heart. And how rich are we toward God? It's only ours for a little while. That's some of the exasperation that Solomon expresses in the book of Ecclesiastes. When he's referring to himself as the preacher. He knows what God has said. And he says, you acquire all of this. And he had acquired a lot. And it was all a gift from God. You remember whenever God said, ask whatever you want? That's probably where the story of the genie in the bottle came from. Whatever your wish is, God appeared to him and said, whatever you want, ask for it and I'll give it to you. And here this young king says, give me wisdom to rule my people. And God was impressed. He was impressed. And so God not only gave him wisdom, but he turns around and says, because of what you've chosen, I'm going to give you power and I'm going to give you wealth. So the world will not have ever seen the kind of wealth that you're going to have. And people from other nations, the Queen of Ethiopia comes in and says, I've not even seen the half of what all is here, and this is amazing. This is amazing. But then Solomon, as he gets older, he gets to thinking, okay, you've got all of this, and you've got all this control, you've got all this power and everything, and then who's going to have it when you die? And you can try to set things up so that it will work out well, and that's what was going on as David died, a man after God's own heart. His family members come to him and they go, oh no, he's going to anoint Solomon as the new king, but one of the other boys is vying for the position already, and he's lining it all up, and he's even got the inauguration parade all worked out. He's got the priest. The high priest is going to come over and anoint him. This is the other brother, and David is still alive. He's on his sick bed, but he's still alive, and this brother's saying, "Man, I better make my move now." And so they have to get it done real quick. David gets it done quicker than the other boy does. And so Solomon becomes king. But Solomon says, who's going to have it when I die? Who's going to have it when I die? And that's the wisdom of Job. What was it that Job said? I came into this world naked, and I'm going to leave this world naked. The Lord gives and the Lord takes away. Now, that is true. The Lord does give and the Lord does talk about taking away. And that is true. In Job's immediate case, there were so many things that Job wasn't seeing. There was so much that Job didn't know. And we're probably blessed that way, at least by the wisdom of God, that we cannot see beyond this life. We cannot see what's happening around us in the heavenlies. We cannot see what angels are doing or what demons are doing or all the threats that are there for tomorrow. And so Jesus said, sufficient unto the day is the evil thereof. He said, don't get into, in some ways, don't get into tomorrow. In other ways, you need to be into tomorrow. But don't bring... What was it they said when we were growing up? Don't borrow tomorrow's troubles. But Job, he's still praying. The Lord gives and the Lord takes away. It was Satan that was taking it away. It was Satan, and Satan is so mad and so angry that he's wanting to take it. And when God gives him freedom in people's lives to do things, he does. And he's vicious and he's mean. But Job said, it's okay. It's okay. I didn't bring anything with me when I showed up. And I'm not going to take any of it with me whenever I leave. Let me tell you, some people try to. And I'm not going to tell you I've seen it all, but I've seen a lot. You know, I managed a funeral home for 3 years in Kentucky, supporting Judy and I, and as our family started, our first 2 children were born in Kentucky, and I managed a funeral home, and I was actually preaching at 2 places every Sunday because of the time difference. So there was a national timeline that came down by there, and so I was preaching because one little place they couldn't find anyone, and so when they got down to the bottom of the barrel, they said, "Hey, Mike, why don't you come and help us?" And so I had to go to Louisville, Kentucky once a month. We lived about 90 miles away down where the hillbillies live, and we were hillbillies back then. And so I would drive to Louisville once a month for a manager's meeting of the funeral homes that this company owned. And I pull up one day, and the first thing I saw was police cars. And I'm going, oh no, something horrible has happened. Boy, my heart's in my throat. And then as I get closer, I see all of these Hell's Angels motorcycles. Not just big Harleys. I mean, these are the real things. And I even see some of the tattooed big guys. And I'm going, and man, there are more of those motorcycles than there are policemen. And I'm going, oh, this is terrible. So my fears even got greater. And what I found out was the queen of the Hell's Angels of all of North and Central and East United States had died. And they had asked the funeral home that I worked with, asked that company to bury her. And so I pull up, and the police some of them recognized me, not because they'd stopped me before, but because anyway, they show me where to park, and so I've got on my coat and tie anyway for the meeting, and so I walk in, and the owner, he's only 5 years older than I am, and he says, "Oh, I'm glad you're here early." He says, "Come on, you got to see this." And so he takes me in, and since we're funeral directors and work for that company, we just walked right in. And they have everyone coming by and viewing the body for the last time. At the end of the service, and man, there were hundreds and hundreds of people there. And as they walk by this lady, if you have small children, go ahead and get them. I'm going to finish this story. So as they're walking by, all of the men, every man that walked by there was wrapping a $100 bill around one of her fingers. And we're standing right there at the head of the casket, which sometimes funeral directors do that. And I'm looking, I'm going, this is unreal. And they wrapped so many around her hand that there was nowhere they could wrap another one. $100 bills, not 5, 10, or ones. Folding them and just sending them. Every woman that came by was taking off jewelry, taking off rings, and laying it there on her dress, on her stomach, and until there was just a mound of jewelry. And then they all stood there after all that was over. I don't know how many hundreds of thousands of dollars was in that casket. And then they all stood there, and I'm sure they're watching us too, as we closed and sealed the casket. And while we're doing that, you can talk in a low voice, and I told the owner, I said, "I'm glad this happened. I need to cash a check." And he said, "Forget it." I said, "I'll even make a donation." But let me just cash a check here. That's buried in a cemetery in Louisville, Kentucky. I know it because I'm an eyewitness to it. Even went to the cemetery with it because they wanted her to live in as great and exorbitant lifestyle in her death as she had in her life. And you can't take it with you. Whose money is it? It's the Lord's. It's the Lord's. Thank you. See you next week.